Greetings, my name is Odin from the Odin's Musings YouTube channel, and I'm here on behalf of our crystals. Today I'm going to show you the basics of the Peyote Bezel stitch, which is a fundamental technique used in a lot of larger pieces, in a lot of focal pendants in pieces, and to add an extra bit of sparkle in jewelry designs. The bezel can be used on round rivolis, or flat cabochons, basically stones that are not holed and have to be beaded around in order to incorporate inside bead weaving projects. The artist Laura McCabe is the most infamous for developing this technique, and I will leave links down below to where you can find her designs and projects. For this project you will need one color of size 11 Delicas, one color size 15 round seed beads, and one either Crystal Rivoli or Flat Cabochon. In the example I'm going to be using a 12mm Rivoli, but I will also give you guidelines on how to create the same exact technique with a 14, a 16, and an 18mm. The steps are almost exactly the same, you'll just be adding rows in certain places and making a larger band. I am using a D-weight white Nymo. Something small around the 4 to 6 pound test of Fireline is also acceptable. For this technique I'm going to be using two size 12 beading needles. I don't really recommend using anything larger, as these beads can be very tight, especially if you hold your tension on your thread really tight. And with all that being said, let us get started. Now, if you're not familiar with the flat peyote, either in odd or even count, I highly recommend you watch our videos on the subject to get a better feel for the technique. There will be links in the description below, as well as a card in the corner here. To start off, I have my thread about a half a wingspan, probably a yard is good length, and it is currently threaded on both ends on two separate needles. I'm going to thread on two of my Delica beads, and I'm going to pass them down to the center of my thread. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, you can adjust it if you want, but where it rests is completely fine. Then, I'm going to take one more Delica bead and pass it down through that first needle. Then I'm going to take the opposite needle and pass up in the same direction through that bead, so that both of my threads are inside the bead. I'm going to then pull that down, and when everything's nice and tight, I will have formed one single peyote stitch. So to continue on, I'm going to add one Delica bead on each of my needles, pull that down, then add one bead on one needle, pull it down the thread, then take my opposite needle and pass up through the bead in the same direction. Then I pull everything down until I have formed my second stitch. Once more, add one bead to each needle, pull them down, then add one bead on one needle, pull it onto the thread, take your opposite needle, and pass up through the same bead and pull it down, so that we have 3 stitches there. For my 12mm Rivoli, I'm going to repeat this until I have 15 stitches total, and that's just easy to count if I count by the edge beads here. So until we have 15 sets of these beads, that's when we need to stop. For a 14mm Rivoli, we will be needing 18 sets. For a 16mm Rivoli, you'll need about 20 stitches. And for an 18mm, you'll need about 23. Now, these numbers can vary depending on how tight your tension is on the thread, what size thread you're using, the type of finish on the Delicas, and if you're not using another kind of bead like Icos or treasure beads. So bear that in mind, be patient, and be a little flexible with the type of stitch that you're going to be using, and be patient because this one takes a little bit to get used to. And that is what my initial bezel band looks like. Double and triple check and count how many bead sets you have, because at this stage it's really easy to fix. If you get further along, it's a little harder to undo if you accidentally thread on the wrong number. Now we need to turn this strip into a ring, and we're going to join the ends using the techniques that we have here. So we have a single bead at the top and 2 beads at the bottom. So all I'm going to do is pay close attention to what's on the left and what's on the right. I'm going to move my threads all the way down and thread my right needle on the right bead, and my left needle on the left bead. I'm going to pull them both through, and when I pull my threads tight, I will have a seamless join of the peyote stitch. Now this is very loose, so I need to reinforce it just by passing through several beads with each thread. So I'm going to take my thread on the right and just kind of follow the peyote and go up and down through the single bead and just kind of pick up beads until I feel that the ring is going to be secure. Then I'm going to repeat with the other thread and just going through some neighboring beads until I can cinch everything together. And I feel the tension and things won't loosen as easily. Once I have done that, I will want to end up with the threads on two separate sides again. This just makes it easier for me to work on both sides of the bezel so that I don't have to move or travel. So once I've done with one side, I can switch over, end my thread, and work on the other side. So to finish this ring, I am going to pick one of my threads and continue in the peyote stitch. But this time, I'm going to switch to size 15 seed beads. So I'm going to add one, then move to the next Delica that's sticking up, so that we place the size 15 seed bead in that gap. Add a size 15, jump over to the next gap, and pull that through so that the 15 sits in place. Do that all the way around until you run out of spaces. And that is what it'll look like once we have finished one side. You can kind of see how everything's sort of pinched together. I'm going to drop that thread and pick up my other one, but I'm also going to pick up my Rivoli and put it in. In this case, it doesn't really matter what color side you do it. Many Rivolis are foiled, which means they have a shiny side and a foiled side. Some are unfoiled, so they are clear all the way through. So determine what side you want where, and nestle your stone in the center of the bezel. And I'm just going to repeat the process with the other thread. I'm going to add my size 15, pass through to the next Delica to fill the gap. And repeat that all the way around. And that is what we end up with. Now you might find that the beads are still kind of loose around it and your Rivoli isn't nicely secured. So all we're going to do to fix that is reinforce all of the beads once more so that this cinches nicely together over the Rivoli. So I'm coming out of a size 15 seed bead. I jumped over from a Delica bead into the size 15, and I'm just going to pass up Delica 15, Delica 15, and so forth all the way around to pull everything tighter. Then you're going to want to do the same thing on the back side to make sure everything is nicely in position and secured in place. Now, larger Rivolis will need additional rows in order to reinforce it. For example, in this 16mm, I needed 2 rows of peyote done in size 15s. And that is very simple to do. So if you're coming out of a Delica bead, you'll want to step up by jumping up through a size 15 bead, then do the peyote once more with size 15. So all you do is add one size 15, jump over through the next size 15 to fill in that gap. Like so. You may find that the 12mm requires it if you can't keep this tight enough and you can't keep it inside of the bezel. This will just pinch it together and cinch everything even further. But sometimes it may not work depending on if you have looser tension. You might find that this doesn't really cinch the gaps, it just sort of makes little pockets and waves on top of it and doesn't sit nicely and flat on top. So, this is another one of those things where it takes a lot of experimentation and takes a lot of practice with thread tension. But generally speaking, a 14mm requires 2 rows of size 15s on both the front and the back. And the same thing with the 16mm. I found that 2 rows of size 15s front and back are what's required to secure this in place. And similarly with a size 18mm. Personally, I have found that 2 rows of 15s is adequate enough, but you may need to step up even further and add a 3rd row. So to kind of walk you through that, after you have finished a row all the way around with 2 rows, you will end up coming out of a size 15 out here, you'll want to step up by going to the highest size 15, pull through, then you will add another size 15, and jump to the next highest point. Then you'll do that all the way around. You may also find that only the front requires 3 and the back requires 2, or the opposite, depending on what you're trying to do and what look you are going for. And that is what your bezel should look like after some securing and reinforcing. Now all we need to do is end our threads, and that's simply done just by weaving around the peyote stitch. You can start off with a diagonal and go up in a zigzag pattern. And you can even secure it further by changing direction, so whenever you're at a place where there are 2 delicas, you can just pass backwards through the delica across the way, so that the loop kind of catches underneath, and you can kind of weave around in a circle around a set of 5 beads. So we can go down further, go around this set, go up further this set, keep going up, and repeat. And once you feel that the thread is nice and secure, you can go ahead and clip your thread. And don't forget to reinforce and secure your thread on the other side. And those are the basics on how to do a peyote bezel. This takes a little bit of time to get used to and to get a feel for what the bezel is supposed to feel like around, and to get it nice and secure around the Rivoli without sacrificing too much of the surface area so that a lot of the sparkle can still shine. So don't be afraid of it. You may end up having to take it apart a few times until you get the exact tension and feel of what you're supposed to do with it. And that will do it for this lesson. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to check down in the description box for a full supply list, as well as links to where you can purchase materials. And while you're down there, feel free to subscribe to Aura Crystals for more updates on new techniques and tutorial ideas. And if you'd like to see more of my work, feel free to check me out at Odin's Musings right here on YouTube or at odinsbeadhall.com.